How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Vav, Daf 56 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, sheesh. Okay, what is on the agenda for today? Today's daf is going to be a bit of, say, kind of like a transition of, what's going on here? Is my beard starting to get in the way? What's going on here? I feel like a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know why. All right, it's okay. So today is going to be a bit of a transition. A transition from what? A transition, from yesterday to today. That yesterday we were talking about the wine press. And, this gets up to the first chapter that we have today, at which point grape juice is considered wine, right? This was a discussion that we began yesterday, and we are going to wrap up that discussion today. And then we get into the next section, which is titled Recycling Dregs in the Wine Press, a little bit of a technical thing. And then we get into Gentiles crushing grapes with their feet. So now, when we get to that section, we are beginning to get into how should I call this? Well, that is our sort of segue into the very detailed and arguably, I would say interesting, but we're really doing like a deep dive into Yei Nesech now. Now we're really starting to jump into Yei Nesech. I don't even know where to start. There's a slide here. So first of all, I have again the wine press slide if we will need it. We have some Tosfos takeaways. And there's a slide that is titled Lots of Moving Pieces. And when we get towards the end of today's daf, when we get into the discussion about Gentiles crushing grapes with their feet, because that starts getting into what's exactly considered Yei Nesech, right? So if you have a Gentile and he touches wine, so it's Yei Nesech, but what if it was by accident? Did he touch it directly? Did he touch it indirectly? There's going to be lots of, right, is it Osir Ba'ano? Is it only Osir B'Shtia? Anyways, we're going to sort of open up that Pandora's box at the end, towards the end of today's daf, and that is going to stay with us for at least the next few days. So that's an exciting thing. I don't know. I feel like I'm not communicating it well. It's more exciting than I'm communicating. Like we're getting into Yei Nesech. Right, with the whole thing about non-Jews touching wine and the wine now being non-kosher, we're going to jump into that because it's such it's a topic that is like very relevant. Like it comes up, and at the same time, it's very sort of enigmatic. Like, what's the deal with like a non-Jew just kind of like touches a bottle of wine, I can't drink it? Like, there's lots and lots of layers to it. I guess is what I'm trying to communicate, and we are going to get into the storm, so to speak, towards the end of today's daf. Anyways, without further ado, we are going to jump in on Daf Nun Vav Omid Aleph. Okay, our journey begins on Daf Nun Vav Omid Aleph, 4 lines from the top. So our Mishnah had said, of course, there was a Mishnah Rishona, a Mishnah Acharona, as we got to at the end of yesterday's daf. But our Mishnah had said that that once the wine, that once the juice, let's pull out our image of the wine press so that we can all get on the same page. So here is our wine press. Where the golden arrow is, of course, is where the grapes get crushed and then they flow through past the pink arrow and through the pipe where I'm imagining the blue arrow is until it gets into the pit, which is where the white arrow is. So the Mishnah had said that the juice becomes wine and therefore Yei Nesech. Okay, already there's lots of details. The Gentile have to actually touch it. Rashbam said he'd even just automatically based on this code. There's so many details when it comes to Yei Nesech, but without getting into too many details, once the juice gets into the pit, that is when Yein Nesech becomes a thing. So now, Frek the Gemara asks, V'otanan. So it says V'otanya, then in the next line it says Ditanan, and then 2 lines after that it says Ditanya. You have to reverse each of them. Because, of course, Tanya is a Brisa, Tanan is a Mishnah, and actually where it says Brisa it means Mishnah, where it says Mishnah means Brisa. So, V'otnan, we learn in the Mishnah in Masechta Maisris. The Mishnah there in Masechta Maisris is teaching at what point things become tevel. What does tevel mean? Tevel is produce that is untied and cannot be eaten until it's tied. So, for example, if you are harvesting wheat, or let's say in this case, grapes, let's just talk about wheat for a second to keep it not related to our daf for a second. So let's say you're harvesting wheat, whatever. So then as long as the wheat is in the field, or maybe even wheat isn't so great because do people really eat wheat? Unlike breaded or something. But anyways, when you're harvesting in the field, so you can eat in a temporary kind of way, what's called arai, as opposed to keva. You can't eat like a proper suda, but you can eat in sort of a temporary manner. However, there's a certain point at which meiser, trumis and meisers must be separated, and you can no longer eat from it at all until trumis and meisers are separated, and that's what's called tevel. But when it is tevel, it cannot be eaten at all. Until it's tevel, you can eat it in a sort of temporary way. So now, applying it to juice/wine, so the question is, if you're harvesting grapes, so you can eat, right? There's even a pasuk in the Torah about that, right? But basically, when you are harvesting grapes, you can eat them as you are harvesting. Something like that, the pasuk says. Probably coming up soon, actually. Anyways, we're in Parshas V'eschon and Ekruvei Shovtim Kiseitze. Probably Parshas Kiseitze. Maybe it comes up. Anyways, so where were we? So the shaila is, you're harvesting grapes. You can eat grapes sort of just in a temporary way, right? It says Valkel Yichalosit. Well, that's a different story. But anyways, in a temporary way, you can eat the grapes. At what point is it tevel and you can't eat the grapes at all anymore? So the Mishnah there says, when it comes to wine, once the juice gets into the vat, well then at that point, that's actually not what the Mishnah says. Let us read what the Mishnah says. We learned in the Mishnah, Yain mishayikape, that actually it's more than that. So we have our diagram, right? The grapes go in at the top of the press, they're crushed, the juice then flows through the pipes into the pit. That's all great. It's not yet tevel. Now, once it's in the pit, although the Gemara is actually going to ask about this in a few lines from now, but let's just say this for now. Once the juice is in the pit, it's not yet tevel. When the pits and the peels separate and float to the top, at that point, it's tevel. So we had said in our Mishnah, in our Mishnah we said that it becomes wine once the juice lands in the pit, and yet this Mishnah from Masechta Maisris says no, it's not yet tevel. It's not yet considered wine, which would make it tevel and chayiv and trumas and maisris, and you can't eat it. You can't drink any of it at all until trumas and maisris are separated. It hasn't yet reached that point when the juice has simply gone into the pit. No, that's not enough. It's more than that. The pits and the peels need to float to the top at that point. It's wine at that point. It's tevel at that point. You can't drink from it at all until trumas and maisris are separated. So now says the Gemara, so ve'atnan, but we learn in a Mishnah in Maisris, yayin, that when it comes to wine, at what point is it considered tevel? Misheikape. Once the pits and the peels separate. Not just once it gets into the pit. So Amar Rava says, Rava Lokasha, no problem, or Rabbi Kiva or Rabbanon. Oh, so Rava says, oh yeah, that's no problem. I hear your question. I get the question. Over here we're saying the juice goes in the pit, it's considered wine. In Meisus we're saying that's not enough, the pits and the peels have to separate. Oh wow, so the wine going into the pit, and then you have the pits and the peels. But anyways, it doesn't matter. So Rava says, I get it. Taketz machlekes chachamim and Rab Akiva. Disanya, as we learn in a brayso yayin, that when it comes to wine, in terms of when it is chayav in Trumas Meisus, right? When it's considered tevel, mishayerid labor. Once the juice goes into the pit, Rabbi Akiva Omer says, Rabbi Akiva mishayekape. Once the pits and the peels separate, and therefore our Mishnah, which is talking about that it's considered wine once the juice goes into the pit, that's the opinion of the Chachamim. And the Mishnah in Maisris, which says that it's considered tevel once the pits and the peels separate from the juice, that is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. As I said a minute ago, the Gemara is now asking the pits and the peels separating. Is that the pits and the peels separating in the pit? The pits and the peels separating in the pit. But of course, as you know, the pit, okay, we have our our photo over here. The pit, of course, is the white arrow. That's the pit I'm talking about. So is it when the pits and the peels separate from when the juice is in the pit, or is it after that when the juice is barreled and the pits and the peels separate in the barrel? What are we talking about? I'm talking about the pit of the wine. Oh, that's I don't know what else to call it. The board, the pit. What else? It's a pit. Aquaponin. We could just call it the peels separate. I don't know. Anyways, the pits and peels versus the pit. How about that? Great. We'll just always say pits and if pit goes together with peel, then it's the pits and the peels. If it's just the pit, it's the pit of the wine press. So Toshma come and hear Disnan that we learn in that same Mishnah in Maisris. Yayin, that when it comes to wine, Misha Yekapit. That when it comes to wine, it's going to be considered tevel once the pits and the peels separate. And even though the pits and the peels separated from the juice, and it's now considered wine, and it's now considered tevel, kolet minagas yona uminatzinor vishose. You can still collect from the wine press, the upper area, as well as from the pipe, right? The wine press being like the gold and pink areas, and the pipe being the blue areas. Vishos, and you can drink it shmamino, kipoy debor, karmino, and shmamino. So we see that we're talking about the pits and the peels separating in the pit of the wine press. Meaning, the Mishnah in Maisris had then said, and even though the pits and the peels separated, wherever they separated, but you can still consume in a temporary manner the juice from the pipe, from the press. So basically it was describing the other parts of the wine press other than the pit, which means that when we're talking about the pits and the peels separating, it means that they're separating in the pit, and even though the juice is in the pit, and the pits and the peels have separated from the juice that's in the pit, nonetheless, you can still drink, and therefore you can't, in terms of the juice that's in the pit, you can no longer consume it at all, even in a temporary way. However, concerning the juice that's still in the other parts of the wine press, like the press at, the top area, the press, or the pipe area, which is by the blue arrow, the wine, the juice can still be consumed in those areas, which means that the pits and peels separating is from the pit of the wine press, not from the barrels. But now the Gemara asks a very interesting kasha. V'atani Reb Zvid, with Reb Boshai, that Reb Zvid asked from a Tosefta. Right, of course, the Tosefta was edited by Reb Chia and Reb Boshai. Now, nobody says this. Rashi doesn't say it, Tosefta doesn't say it, but I think, in my mind, Kilu, there's a principle here, which is that there's like different levels. Wait, why am I saying this? How about this? Let me take it from a different angle. Basically, meaning it says that Reb Zvid says Reb Zvid taught with the Reb Boshai. What's the Reb Boshai? The Tosefta. the Tosefta was edited by Rabbi Boshaya, just generally speaking, in terms of sort of hierarchy, preference, of course, goes to the Mishnayos. That's kind of the most well-established and most broadly accepted and well-edited versions of Torah Shabbat Peh is the Mishnayos that were edited by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And then the next best thing is the Tosefta, which was edited by Reb Chia and Reb Oshai, which is what we're talking about now. Now, it's interesting, and then there are just like general brises. Okay, this is the Avgad Tosefta, but then there are general brises. General brises, unless there's something that contradicts it, whatever, we accept general brises, right? They come up in the Gemara all the time. But in terms of validity or its level of like accuracy, just kind of random brises are at the bottom. So therefore, why am I saying this? Because we're saying Vatani Reb Zvid b'Divrei Boshaya that Reb Zvid taught from a Tosefta Yayin Mishayered Labor V'Yikpeh, that according to the Chachamim, when is grape juice considered wine and therefore considered tevel? So says the Chachamim, from when it goes into the pit, and the pits and the peels separate. Rabbi Kiva Omer Mishayeshale Bechavius. And Rabbi Kiva says from when it is barreled. So meaning, we were saying up until now that the Chachamim, that our Mishnah is like the Chachamim, who say that it's considered tevel once the juice goes into the pit. And Rabbi Kiva says it's considered tevel once the pits and the peels separate. But now we're seeing from a Tosefta that actually, according to the Chachamim, it's when the juice goes into the pit and the pits and the peels separate from the juice. And Rabbi Kiva is saying something else, which is once it's barreled. And the reason why I got into the whole Mishnah, Tosefta, regular brises thing is because the first brise that we had was just a regular brisa, right? The Tanya, Yain Misher Labor, Rabbi Kiva Omer Misher Yikpeh. But now we have a Tosefta that's saying, and I was saying Rashi doesn't go into this whole like sort of hierarchy of stuff, but I think that's like the premise, right? It's like, yeah, we had a random brisa that says that according to the Chachamim it's Yain Misher Labor, and according to Rabbi Kiva it's Misher Yikpeh. But we have a Tosefta though that says that no, according to the Chachamim it's Misher Labor V'Yikpeh. And according to Rabbi Kiva, it's once it's barreled. So Velamas Nisan, where am I? So, okay. So we have this Tosefta that seems to be saying different. So what do we do? Where am I? So, okay, but yeah, exactly. I missed something, right? So, Tartzena milach kamaisa achi yain misher lebor v'yikber b'kiva omer misher yishal b'chavis. Right? Yeah, I knew I was missing something when. Okay. Anyways, and the Gemara therefore answers. So switch the first brisa, and that's what I was getting at, right? That meaning. We had a random brisa that says that the Chacham's opinion is once the juice goes into the pit. Rabbi Kiva's opinion is once the pits and the peels separate. But we have a Tosefta, which is kind of higher up in the hierarchy, that says that according to the Chacham, it's once it goes into the pit and the peels separate. According to Rabbi Kiva, it's once it's barreled. So therefore, the Gemara says, so you know what? Okay, change the initial brisa, the random brisa, to be, meaning we're going to accept the Tosefta as definitive, and therefore tartzo namilach kamaisa, and therefore explain the first brisa also hachi in that same way as the Tosefta, to be in line with the Tosefta. Yain mishere labor v'yikpeh, that according to the Chachamim, it's once the wine, when it comes to wine, it's once the juice goes into the pit and the pits and the peels separate. Rabbi Kiva Omer, whereas Rabbi Kiva says mishe yishal b'chavis, once it is barreled, right? So therefore, we are accepting the Tosefta as definitive. So now ve'elamas nisan dekatoni eno ose yenesech hacher labor. But now, what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is now the outlier. Because we have a Mishnah in Maisris that says that wine is considered tevel once the pits and the peels separate. We have a Tosefta, which is saying, and that is the opinion of the Chachamim, once the pits and the peels separate from the juice in the pit of the wine press. And then we have the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, who says, once it's barreled. Our Mishnah now, in the context of Yei Nesech, seems to be an outlier. Because our Mishnah is saying that the juice is considered wine once it goes into the pit, and that's it. So now our Mishnah, the Katani, which says, our Mishnah says that it's considered wine, and it could be a nesech, immediately upon entering into the pit. Should we say that there's actually 3 opinions? So we have our Mishnah, which says that wine, juice is considered wine once the juice gets into the pit. Then we have the opinion of the Chachamim from Maisris, from the Tosefta, that say it's once the juice goes into the pit and the pits and the peels separate from it. And then you have Rabbi Akiva's opinion, which is once it's bound. So are we saying that there are 3 positions over here? To which the Gemara says, no, there aren't 3 positions. There are 2 positions. The positions from Maisris, once the juice goes into the pit and the pits and the peels separate, and Rabbi Akiva says it's from its barrel. Shiny Yeinesech dachmir be'avonim. In terms of Yeinesech, our Mishnah over here, Yeinesech is a wild card. Yeinesech it's a dinder abonon. The whole Yeinesech thing, it seems there's something about Yeinesech which is like unique. That it seems like, I don't know, just general impressions. Maybe you agree. There's something about Yeinesech that the rabbis got very excited about, in a way that they didn't get excited about bread and oil and beer and cheese. Like, specifically when it comes to Yeinesech, there's also, even Tosfos is talking about all the time. Look, at the end of the day, Gentiles aren't really Ovdei Kuchavim for the most part, at least not in our societies, really. And yet still, we're like as machmir about Yeinesech as ever. There's like something particularly stringent about Yeinesech. So therefore, if you're saying the Ikar Adin, when is juice considered wine? The answer is, according to the Chacham, it's once the juice goes into the pit and the pits and the peels separate from the juice. Rabbi Akiva says it's once it's barreled. What about the fact that by Yeinesech, we're saying it's immediately upon when the juice goes into the pit? That's Yeinesech. Yeinesech is its own ballgame. The Chacham are particularly machmir there. How come? I don't exactly know. Remember, there's Yeinesech and there's Stam Yenim. That's going to be part of the whole complex arena that we're shifting into soon. Stam Yenim is be'etzim about, right? Gazu Chacham al Yenim mishum b'nosan, as we learned the other, a week or 2 ago. And that's just like bread or fraternization. But Yeinesech, all these gezeras, there's something about Avodah Zarah. And we're like, even though Avodah Zarah isn't like such a thing right now as it used to be, still we're like as machmir about it as ever. Don't ask kashas from Yeinesech. Yeinesech is its own thing. Okay. Well, the Rava, and according to Rava, the lo shiny lay. And according to Rava, who at the beginning of our Gemara, when the Gemara asked, wait, why is our Mishnah saying that the juice becomes wine immediately when it goes into the pit? What about the Mishnah in Maisers that says that it's once the pits and the peels separate from the juice? And Rava didn't say, oh yeah, Yeinesech is different. It implies that Rava says that we don't consider Yeinesech to simply be an outlier. So he'll have to say, okay, there are simply 3 opinions about when juice becomes wine. There's our Mishnah, whose opinion, right? There's the opinion in our Mishnah that it is immediately when the juice goes into the pit. There is the opinion from the Mishnah in Maisris and the Tosefta, which is when the pits and the peels separate from the juice. And there's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva that it is when it is bound, right? So according to Rava, the lo shani lay, who does not seem to be making this differentiation or distinction to say that, oh yeah, Yeinesech is its own separate thing. He doesn't say that. So mukim lo kitzos tanoi. So he says that it's simply 3 opinions about when juice is considered to be wine. So now Tosfos Taka asks an interesting kasha. Tosfos Taka asks an interesting kasha. How could wine sitting in a pit be chayiv in Trumas and Maisros? As we know, maybe we don't know it super well, it doesn't come up all the time, but it's come up. of course, there's a requirement when it comes to tevel that things are only chayiv and trumas and when it's roe pnei abayis. That let's say you have a bunch of grain in the field and you put it in a pile. It's not yet, you could still eat from it temporarily. It's not yet considered tevel, that if you eat from it, you'll be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Once you bring it into your house, or I think we're into a storage area, I think is also fine. But once it's roe pnei abayis, it's only at that point that it becomes tevel, and if you eat it, you're chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. So why are we talking about that when juice is sitting in a pit and the pits and the peels separate from it, it's chayiv in trumas and it's tevel? What do you mean? It's sitting in a pit outside. So Tosfos gives two answers. Answer number one, Yitaka right. It isn't yet actually chayiv in trumas and maasros. It's not yet actually tevel. It's sitting in a pit. You're right. What we're saying is, if from there you bring it into the house, meaning the point is at that point it's ready, everything that has been done to the processing of this juice has been done. It's already been in the wine press, it's been stomped on and gone through the pipes, and now it's in the pit, and the pits and the peels are separated. There is no longer any processing that needs to be done, and therefore once it is brought into the house, at that point it would be tevel. Meaning, as opposed to if you take a cup and put it into the press area, the upper area, and fill it up with juice and bring it into your house, that would not be considered tevel. You would be able to drink that cup of juice. But if you did the same thing from the pit area with this juice that's been sitting in the pit, and the pits and the peels have separated from it, and you bring that into your house, that will be tevel. You can't drink that. Right? So it isn't technically yet considered tevel, you're right, but the point is that the juice in the pit, as opposed to the juice in the other parts of the press, that if you bring it into the house, it would be considered tevel. It's completely finished its processing. Answer number two is, well, what if the wine press is in the house? If you have a wine press in the house, so the point is that the juice that's in the pit, and the pits and the peels have separated from it, then that would already be considered tevel, and you would not be able to eat, you would not be able to consume any of the juice/wine until trumas and maasros have been separated, once the juice is in the pit and the pits and the peels have separated. Oh, so we have the Tosfos takeaway slide. How could wine sitting in a pit require maaser? Tosfos gives two answers. Either it doesn't yet require maaser, the distinction is only once it's been brought into the house, and answer number two, the wine press is in the house. Therefore, immediately, once the pits and the peels separate, it's considered tevel. So now we are moving on to the next section of today's daf. Recycling dregs in the wine press. Okay, exciting times. Here we go. Says the Gemara, Masha bebor osur vashar mutter. Okay, so our Mishnah had said that, okay, once the wine goes into the into the pit, then that which is in the pit becomes, or can become, yenesech. It's considered wine, but whatever's in the rest of the wine press, in the upper parts, the pipes, whatever, remains mutter. Is not yenesech. Omer Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, lo shanu ela shelo hechzir gargustni legas. Aval hechzir gargustni legas osir. Says Rav Huna, however, that so long as you have not recycled the dregs into the wine press, meaning, so in the pipe, right, so of course, as we know at this point, there was the grapes at the top of the press, and you would stomp on them, and the grapes would become juice, and the juice would flow through pipes, and from the pipes would go into the pit. There's one other part of the wine press that we haven't talked about. There's a filter. At the end of the pipe, they attach a filter so that any dregs or whatever would be filtered out and not land in the pit, at least as much as they can, because I guess we talked about the pits and the peels separating from the juice in the pit. But anyways, there would be some kind of a gargusti with some kind of a basket, some kind of a filter, and the juice would flow through this gargusti, and whatever it can collect, it would collect. And Rav Huna says that if you take that filter and then dump it back in to the top of the wine press, then everything would become also, because the filter already, what's in the filter is already considered yain nesech. And therefore, if you take that and dump it back in the top of the wine press, you're basically taking yain nesech and you're putting it, mixing it together with the rest of the wine press. So then the rest of the wine press will be osur. So meaning when the Mishnah says that which is in the pit is osur, but the rest of the wine press is mutter, if you take the filter and then dump the contents of the filter back in the top of the wine press, that wouldn't be true anymore. Then the stuff in the top of the wine press would also be true. Tosfos asks an interesting kasha. Who can tell me what Tosfos' kasha is? Tosfos' kasha is, what about batel b'shishim, Cheveh? What about batel b'shishim? What do you say, Cheveh? What about batel b'shishim? What about batel b'shishim? You have this yain nesech. So you take a little bit of yain nesech from the filter and you dump it into the top of the wine press. So you have some osur stuff, the yain nesech, and you're dumping it into the top with the rest of the grapes. Why don't we just say that it's both of you? You have this isur, you have the yain nesech. If it's not imparting any flavor, if it's not nosing tom, it's less than 60. It's a little bit of dregs, a little bit of wine from the filter is going to go in the top of the wine press. Who cares? It should be batel b'shishim. What do you say? It's taka good kasha. So Tosfos says that there's a Gemara on Daf Samach Vav that we'll get to in about 10 days. It's interesting Gemara. What the Gemara says there on Daf Samach Vav is there's a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. That what happens if you have some new wine, chamra chadta, some new wine, and the new wine mixes together with grapes. So in terms of, if this is yain nesech, is it going to make the grapes osur? So Abaye says there that it does make the grapes osur, whereas Rava says it doesn't make the grapes osur. Abaye says it does make the grapes osur because it's min bimino. Wow, Chevre. Okay, is it gewaldige tosfos? I don't know, Chevre. I hope that you're happy that we're getting into this tosfos. It's gewaldig. And we're going to be getting into this stuff. Look, it's inevitable, Chevre. It's not like we're bringing it out of nowhere, Chevre. This is from Daf Samach Vav. It's coming in Chevre, we're getting into some complicated waters over here. We're getting into complicated waters. I think we should just jump right in. Let's dive into the deep end. Noisein tam and min bimino. So we've seen this before. So min bimino means two of the same types of two of the same types. Min b'she'enu means two different types. And the halacha is that when you have min bimino, two of the same types, it's osur b'mashu. Even a little bit makes it osur. Like we're saying over here, you take these dregs or whatever wine is caught in the filter and you dump it at the top, so the whole top is osur, even a little bit. But when you have min b'she'enu mino, two separate types, well then, it's only going to be also b'nosing tam, and by default, we calculate nosing tam as being 1/60th, and if it's less than a 60th, it should be bottle. So now here's the thing, there's this machlokes. I hope it's okay that I'm getting into this. I hope it's not too much of a detail, but it's gewalt, because it's such a gewaltig akasha. It's worth it to get into it, but this isn't so hard. So there's machlokes between Rav and Abaye in 10 days from now, that when you have some yain nesech, but it's new wine, and it gets mixed together with some grapes. So the question is, do we consider it min bimino, in which case it's osur b'mashu, or do we consider it min b'she'enu mino, in which case it's osur b'nosing tam, and it would be batel b'shishim. So now, the thing is, so Abaye says it's considered min bimino, because new wine is just, what's new wine? It is grape juice, basically. So new wine tastes the same thing as grapes. And since the taste is the same, we consider them both to be the same thing, and therefore it's osur b'mashu. Rava says no, new wine is still wine. It's not grapes, and therefore it's min b'she'eno mino, and it's only going to be batel. It's only going to be osur b'nosing tam, and it can be batel b'shishim. So now, that being the case, bringing it back to our Gemara over here, if you're taking some of the yain nesech from the gargusni and you are putting it back in the wine press. So normally, of course, we only paskin like Abaye when it comes to Yal Kigam. 6 specific cases, only in 6 cases we paskin like Abaye. Generally, we paskin like Rava. Rava says it's min b'she'eno mino, and therefore it should be batel b'shishim. That's Tosfos' kasha. I hope you're happy with that. We went through that tiny little machlokes, just appreciate Tosfos' kasha. Why do we say batel b'shishin? Why do we say batel b'shishin? We take a little bit of yain nesech, put it in the top of the wine press, and batel b'shishin. So Tosfos gives two answers. Tosfos gives two answers. One answer is you could say that Rav Huna holds like Abai. We don't hold like Abai. We hold like Rav Huna holds like Abai for some reason. Okay, therefore he says that because he holds like Abai, therefore it's min b'mino, and therefore it's asur b'mashu. And therefore you take the little bit of yain nesech from the gagusni and you put it at the top of the wine press and it mixes together with the grapes. Everything is also no. Tosfos' second answer is that you could say it's stuck a lot of juice also in the wine press. You know, at the top of the wine press is not just grapes. There's actually a lot of liquid there, a lot of juice there, and therefore actually it's min b'mino. You're taking this wine and mixing it together with grape juice, and it all gets mixed together. It's actually min b'mino, and therefore it's also b'mashu. So the Tosfos takeaway is, what about batel b'shishin? Why does Rav Huna say that taking they're taking this filter, this basket, and dumping it at the top makes the whole wine press asur? What about batel b'shishin? So we give two answers. One is that, well, Rav Huna holds like Abaye, who says it's considered min b'mino, and therefore it's asur b'mashu, it's not batel b'shishin. The other option is that there's a lot of wine in the wine press as well, and therefore it's min b'mino, because you're taking the wine, the yain nesech from this filter, and you're joining it together with whatever juices at the top of the wine press, and therefore it's min b'mino, and therefore it's asur b'mashu, and that's why it makes everything asur. How are the Tosfos? How's it going with the Tosfos? With the Tosfos takeaways? Let me know, because Tosfos is so gewaldig. It's so geschmack, but let me. Let me know how it's going with the Tosfos. Let me know how it's going with the Tosfos. Right, so anyways, right, so Rav Huna had said, that we only say that the rest of what's in the pit is yain nesech, but the rest of the wine press is mutter so long as the filter hasn't been returned, the stuff in the filter hasn't been returned to the other parts of the wine press. But if you took from the filter and mixed it together with the rest of the wine press, also, and then we saw Tosfos' kasha about what about min b'mino, and we said, okay, it'll be the rest of it will be got also. But now, gargusni gufa b'mai ka mitzvah. But now, frek the Gemara, why is the filter itself even also? Why is what's in the filter asur? So we want to suggest b'nitzok. Shmamina nitzok chibur. And however, we're not going to get into the big Tosfos about nitzok. Don't worry. But who can tell me what nitzok is? Did I tell you about my friend Manu? Did I tell you about my friend Manu? My friend Manu is a yid here from Yerushalayim. He's now in Florida. If anybody from Florida meets a yid named Manu. Anyway, so he was learning mikvos. He was learning mikvos, and we were schmoozing about nitzok. So nitzok be'etzeb, what it means is that, well, so how did whatever's in the filter become? How did whatever's in the filter become yain nesech? Well, because as the juice flows through the wine press and then goes through the pipe, so there's going to be a stream of liquid going from the filter, falling down into the pit. And because there's a stream, right, so you have the yain nesech in the pit, and then you have the filter, let's say, above it, and connecting the filter and the connecting the filter and the contents of the pit and the yain nesech in the pit is a constant stream, a stream that's flowing from the filter down to the yain nesech in the pit, and that stream will be considered a connection, and therefore it's making it all one body of yain nesech. So it sounds like this is saying it's a shaila, right? It's a question: is nitzok considered a chibur or not? When you have a stream that's connecting two bodies of water, is that considered a connection, right? Imagine you have a pot and you're pouring water from a bottle into a pot. So you have water in the pot, you have water in your bottle. With the stream coming from the bottle into the pot, does that stream connect the contents of the bottle to the contents of the pot? So from the fact that we're saying that the filter, whatever's in the filter is going to be considered yain nesech, it sounds like we're saying that the stream is connecting the yain nesech in the pit to the contents of the filter. Answers the Gemara, Kidetani Reb Chia shepchosatu sluchiso achinami shepchosatu baru. Well, Reb Chia answers in another content. Okay, so let's say you have an Ovid Krechavim, and he comes with his wine pouch or whatever it is, and he says to a Yid, "Hey, can you fill me up with some wine?" So the Yid takes out his funnel and he takes out some wine. And he's pouring wine through the funnel into the wine sack of the Ovid Krechavim. So what happens in that case, says Reb Chia, if the Yid is pouring his kosher wine through his funnel into the wine sack or whatever of the Ovid Krechavim, and then now of course the wine skin whatever of the Ovid Krechavim is, whatever's in there is going to be also, it's going to be Yenesech. So if the level of the wine as it rises, then touches the funnel, the Yid's funnel, well then whatever is in that funnel now is going to become Yenesech. So the point is over here the same thing. I mean, we're not talking about nitzok chibur here. We're not saying that the reason why the contents of the filter are also because there's a stream that's connecting the contents of the pit to the contents of the filter. No, the reason why the contents of the filter are also is because the level of the contents of the pit, of the juice in the pit, rose until it was literally touching the filter, and it literally whatever was in the filter came in contact directly with the yenesech in the pit, and that is why what's in the filter is osur. Okay, so it has nothing to do with nitzok. It's simply, it came into contact with the yenesech from the pit. How yanuka the tana avodas kechom. So maybe let's just take a breather for 1 second to point out that we are now beginning to shift into what I was talking about earlier. I'll get into it more, I think, in a minute. But now we are starting to talk more about what makes Yain Nesech, that when we have scenarios where Gentiles come into contact with wine, and we are talking about is it Yain Nesech, is it osur, is it mutter? We are now starting to shift into that conversation. So now says the Gemara, and this is basically going to be going on for the next several dafs. We're going to have lots of different scenarios where there was wine, there were Ovdei Kochavim, the Ovdei Kochavim touched the wine. Is it Yain Nesech? Isn't it Yain Nesech? How osur is it? How mutter is it? So now to kick off this conversation, how Yanuka the Tana Avodas Kechavim B'Shis Shnei. There was this young boy. He was 6 years old, and he had already learned Masechta Avodah Zarah. Not bad. Again, how Yanuka the Tana Avodas Kechavim B'Shis Shnei. He was a 6-year-old boy, and he had learned Masechta Avodah Zarah. They were giving him a faher. Ba'omine, they asked him, Ma'u lidroch ima oved kechavim bagas. Well, if you have an oved kechavim and he's in his own wine press, can a yid stomp on the grapes with the oved kechavim? Amlu, and this little boy says, Dorchin ima oved kechavim bagas. Yeah, it's cool, no problem. But v'raka menasech biyodeh. But 1 second, but the Ovid Kochavim is going to be touching the wine. It's going to be Yain Nesech. It's going to be Yain Nesech. Don't we have to be concerned about it becoming Yain Nesech? Right, after all, right, we saw the opinion, we saw the Mishnah Acharona yesterday, that once the juice begins to flow at the top of the wine press, it already becomes, we have to be concerned about Yain Nesech. So how could the Yid be involved with that? Titzayerna lehu liyadeh. Well, the Oved Kochavim's hands were tied. Okay, we tied his hands so he couldn't actually touch any of the wine. What about his feet? His feet are going to touch the wine. Nisuch de regalosh me nisuch. Well, touching the wine with the feet doesn't make it Yain Nesech. Okay, so therefore it would be okay to stomp on these grapes so long as his hands are tied and it's only being stomped on with the feet. Okay. So I kind of saved what I wanted to say about the Yain Nesech kind of stuff that we're getting into until now, because I think now is really where things start kind of splitting hairs a little bit. So now I created this slide. I made this slide called Lots of Moving Pieces. And I made this slide because, as I had said a minute ago, over the next few days, we are going to be seeing lots of different scenarios about Yain Nesech. And we're going to be trying to figure this thing out. In what case are things also? So let's just have a look at this slide for a second of all the kinds of things that we're going to be working with. So here's a slide that says lots of moving pieces. For example, how did he touch it? Did he touch it with his hands? Did he touch it with his feet? Did he touch it with a stick? Was he holding a vessel? Right, was the wine in a vessel? These are all right. Did he touch it directly with his hands or with some kind of medium? What was his intention? Was it a complete fluke? He didn't even realize that it was wine? Did he intend to touch it, but just not to libate? Right, we're about to see an example where he was like measuring. Right, he didn't have a measure. Instead of using a measuring stick, he used his hand to see how much wine there is, how far up his hand would go. So he intended to touch the wine, but he didn't intend to libate it. Maybe his intention was to libate. Well, what if his intention was literally to do Avodah Zarah? Now, according to we're going to see, it's going to come up, there's an opinion of Reb Shimon. We'll see the context where he says, you can even drink it. The Chum say you could sell it but not drink it. So how usher is it? Is it only usher to sell? Right? Is it usher even to sell? Maybe it's only usher to drink it. But maybe you can't drink it, but you could sell it. Maybe all of the Yain Nesech, maybe just the value of the, maybe all of the wine, maybe just if some Yain Nesech got mixed in, or maybe just that value you can't get benefit from. We're talking about Yain Nesech, we're talking about Stam Yainim. When we say mutter, do we say completely mutter? Do we say it's only mutter to sell, but also to drink? There are so many. The reason why I'm highlighting all these moving pieces is because, as I said, we're about to get into some complicated waters, but also we're going to be seeing lots of different scenarios that are going to be coming up in the next few dapim. And it's important to be clear that there's lots of moving pieces, and for us to try to figure out what is the halacha in these particular cases, and how is one case different than another case, and why in this case was this mutter, why in this case was that usher. I'm pointing all these things out so that we're kind of milichatchila, we're going into it knowing that there's a lot of moving pieces here, and for us to try to keep organized as much as we can in our heads, what's allowed, what's mutter, what's usher, how not mutter, etc., etc. Now, says the Gemara, and Daf Nunvav Mud Beis, 4 lines to the bottom. There was a scenario in Arda. What happened? The Dasher Yisrael v'Ovid Kochavim lahu cham. Well, in Ovid Kochavim and a Yid had stomped together on some grapes and made some wine tzazamin together. Now, V'shaye Shmuel tzlasa riglei, and Shmuel deferred. He postponed giving a ruling on this wine for 3 festivals, right? Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, for 3 festivals, because each festival, before each festival, everybody would come for the shear that would happen before the festival, and he was hoping that when everybody would come for the festival, maybe somebody would be able to bring an interesting brisa, an interesting mishnah, an interesting something that he would be able to use in his ruling, that would be able to help him in making a decision. My time, how come? So, well, okay, gewaldig. Mamish gewaldig. So, well, maybe because Shmuel figured that Shmuel thought to say that this was completely awesome. That this wine is not just also b'shtia, it's also ba'anoah. It's completely also. But he wanted some more support. He wanted to get some more support, and therefore, my time because the kasaver, because Shmuel was hoping the mashkachna tana, if when, hopefully when everybody comes before the Shalosh Regalim, I'll find a teacher of Brises who will teach the Asar, who will bring some kind of a support to say that this wine is Asar, ki Rab Nosson, like is the opinion of Rab Nosson that we're about to see. Shmuel was saying, I want to pass like Rab Nosson that it's Asar. I just want some extra support. So Osrine afilu ba'ano, and if I could find some extra support to say that it should be Asar even ba'ano, like Rab Nosson says, I'll say it's Asar even ba'ano. The Tanya is learning in the Brisa, Modidu, or Modido, Bein bayad, bein baregel yimocher. Wow. So says the Chachamim, if an Ovid Kochavim measures wine, right? So let's say, you have a barrel of wine or something, and the Ovid Kochavim wants to measure how much wine is in the barrel. So one way to measure is he could stick his arm in or his foot in and see how far up his foot or his arm it goes. So in that case, the Chachamim say Yimocher. Yimocher means you could sell it, meaning you can't drink it, but you could sell it. So what's this case? Again, going back to the lots of moving pieces slide. Well, you have an Ovid Kochavim. So he had Kavanas Maga, but not Kavanas Nisuch. He intended to touch the wine, right? He clearly intended to put his hand in the wine, but not for Avodah Zarah purposes, but just in order to measure with it. And the Chachamim are saying that it's Asar b'shtil, Mutter ba'ano. You could sell it. Rab Nosson Omer biyad Asar. Rab Nosson says, if it's with his hand, it's completely Asar. And Rashi points out, the top Rashi of the of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, mashkach natan da Asar Rab Nosson yain ba'ano b'mago shel Ovid Kochavim aval pi shelo nischo la'avodas Zarah. Even though he didn't libate for Avodah Zarah, the nisach la'ave Asar ba'ano ela yidei shichshuch. That there's a concern, and this is important, right? That there's a concern that what's going to make it yei nesech, that'll move it around, even just like, I guess, moving around the wine with his hand with the intention of Avodah Zarah, that could make it yei nesech. So that's a concern. Is he going to do this? So Rab Nosson says, look, if it's with his hand, so if he's putting his hand directly in the wine, it's also even ba'ano, because we're concerned about shichshuch, that maybe he's going to move the wine around and it'll be considered yei nesech. Rab Nosson Omer biyad also beregel mutter. But if it's with his foot, if he's measured with the foot, then it'll be mutter. I assume what that means is mutter ba'ano, but also b'shasiyah. But Amar do Amar Rab Nosson biyad beregel mi Amar. But Rab Nosson only says that it's also afilu ba'ano if it's with his hand. But over here we're talking about where they were stomping on grapes with their feet. So I don't know that Rab Nosson would say that it's also ba'ano, right, when it comes to stomping with your feet. Ella, rather what Shmuel was looking for was the opposite. Timashkach natana deshari ki Reb Shimon ashari afilu b'shasiyah. So there's an opinion, so there's a machlokes between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon. So I'm going to explain it, I think, kind of like Tosfos explains it, which is Betzim, and Daf Samachim Beis is machlokes between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon about if an Ovid Kochavim sticks a measuring stick into wine. So here he's not touching the wine directly or putting his feet or his hands in, whatever, but he puts a measuring stick in the wine. According to Reb Shimon, it's completely mutter. Completely mutter. According to Reb Shimon, it's completely mutter, even to drink, even b'shasiyah. And therefore, Shmuel wanted to say that basically, according to Reb Shimon, if he uses a stick, so he doesn't touch it directly, but we want to say that basically using one's feet would be the equivalent of using a stick, right? If you use your hand, it's a different story. But we want to say that just like Reb Shimon says that if you measure with a stick, it would be mutter even to drink. So also in this case, by using the feet, it would be mutter to drink. And therefore, Shmuel waited to see if he could find somebody to paskin like Reb Shimon, in which case he would say that this wine is mutter even to drink. So that's what we are talking about. So Cheva, already you kind of see there all the moving pieces, right? Right. We saw so many things just now, just in the last few lines, right? Is he touching it with his hands? Is he touching it with his feet? Is he touching it with a measuring stick? Is it Asur Ba'ana? Is it only Asur B'Shasiyah? We're getting into it, Chaver. We're getting into it. So, anyways, that was Daf Nunvav of Masechta Avodah Zarah, and as I said a few times already, we're going to be going through more and more of these scenarios about Yein Nesech over the next few days, and with all of the moving pieces to kind of sort out and try our best. Sometimes the Gemaras seem to be contradicting one another, so we're going to try to the best of our ability to sort out some kind of mahalach over here with Yein Nesech. Okay, so on today's daf, we discussed at which point grape juice is considered wine. We saw 3 opinions once the juice lands in the pit, which was essentially what our Mishnah had said. There was once the pits separate from the juice in the pit, which was essentially the Mishnah in Maisris, and also the opinion of the Chacham in Tosefta. And according to Rabbi Kiva, when the wine is barreled, at that point it's considered wine, and in terms of Trumis and Maisris, it would be considered Tevel at that point. We talked about recycling the dregs in the wine press, meaning if you take from that filter and dump it back in the rest of the wine press, we say it makes the whole wine press Osir. We talked about along the way Batul B'Shishim, which is an interesting discussion. And we talked about Gentiles crushing grapes with their feet. I think the general vibe basically was to say that it should be okay, right? Because we had said that basically if the guy is, right, what do you say? Nisuch derega lo shmei nisuch. And then we talked about Shmuel, who sounded like he wanted to paskin, to say that Reb Shimon would say that it's mutter. So, okay. So, Cheva, here we go. That was Daf Nun Vov of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers. I thought that I had